The bear cub arrived in a shoebox. That detail appeared in the intake record at the Cascade Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in Chelan County, Washington, written in the cramped handwriting of the night volunteer who had been on call when the state trooper knocked on the center's door at 11:45 on a Tuesday in April. The trooper had found the cub on the shoulder of Highway 2, east of Stevens Pass, sitting in the road median in the way that very young orphan bears sometimes sit. Not wandering, not hiding, just present in the specific stillness of an animal that has not yet learned that stillness does not protect you. He was approximately 6 weeks old. His eyes had been open for less than 2 weeks. He weighed just under 2 pounds. The shoebox had been the trooper's idea. He had driven with it on his passenger seat for 40 minutes with the heat on. And when he handed it through the center's door, he said, "I did not know what else to do," which was the most honest thing anyone had said in that building in a while. The night volunteer called Gloria Sinclair at 11:52 p.m. Gloria had been the center's director for 19 years. She had a rule about calls after 10 o'clock. She answered all of them on the first ring, which was the rule, and she had a second rule, which was that she did not allow herself to form attachments to animals below a certain weight threshold, because below that threshold the mortality rate made attachment a form of self-harm. The cub was below the threshold by a considerable margin. She drove to the center anyway. The cub's mother had not been found. The trooper had searched the surrounding area before calling it in. The shoulder, the tree line, the drainage below the road. The sow could have been struck further up the highway and not recovered before dark. She could have crossed and not come back for reasons no one would ever know. The cub's condition, responsive, eyes open, no injuries beyond the cold, suggested he had not been alone for more than 12 hours. Beyond that, the record was blank. Gloria examined him in the intake room with the overhead light on and the box on the examination table, and the cub sitting in the corner of it looking at her with the dark, uncomprehending attention of something that has no framework yet for what a person is. She named him Chet. She told herself the name was a record-keeping convenience. She had been telling herself this about names for 19 years, and she had gotten no better at believing it. Chet weighed 1 pound 14 ounces on the intake scale. His temperature was 96.2 degrees, which was low. Black bear cubs maintain a body temperature around 98 to 99 degrees, and his hydration was borderline. He had a small abrasion above his right eye that was not serious. His lungs were clear. He was, as far as Gloria could assess in an initial examination at midnight in April, alive and intending to stay that way, which was more than she could say for most animals that arrived at this weight. She set up a warming box in the nursery room, and she went home at 3 a.m., and she drove back at 6 a.m., and Chet was where she had left him, which was the first thing he did that she allowed herself to feel something about. The feeding protocol for orphan black bear cubs at Chet's age was a specialized formula, a high-fat, high-protein milk replacer, calibrated to approximate the fat content of black bear milk, which is among the richest of any North American carnivore at roughly 25% fat in the early nursing period. Gloria had handled 4 orphaned cubs before Chet, 3 of which had survived to release. She knew the protocol. She also knew that the protocol for a cub this young required feedings every 2 to 3 hours around the clock for the first several weeks, and that the center's volunteer capacity at that time of year, early spring before the summer influx, was not equal to that schedule. She hired a temporary assistant with grant money she had been holding for a different purpose. Her name was Trudy Archer, 28, a wildlife biology graduate student from Washington State, who had worked 2 previous seasons at a waterfowl rehabilitation center in Oregon, and who had, as far as Gloria could assess in a 10-minute phone interview, the specific combination of competence and unsentimental practicality that this kind of work required. Trudy arrived on a Thursday and met Chet and said, "He is very small." "Yes," Gloria said. How long do bear cubs stay this small? Not long, Gloria said. That is part of the problem. The problem Gloria was referring to was not Chet's size. The problem was what Chet would become and on what timeline, and what that meant for every decision between now and then. Black bears reach sexual maturity at 3 to 4 years. They are fully grown. Males averaging 250 to 300 pounds in the Cascades range. By age 4 or 5, an orphaned bear raised by humans without strict wild contact protocols develops what wildlife managers call food conditioning and human habituation, which is the technical description for the thing that gets bears killed. A habituated bear is a bear that has learned to associate humans with food and safety. A habituated bear that reaches 250 pounds and walks into a campground is a bear that a wildlife officer will have to destroy. Gloria had read the literature. She had attended the conferences. She had sat in rooms with researchers from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and listened to the data on habituation outcomes. And she had come home and looked at the animals in her care and thought about what it meant to raise something well enough that it could survive without you. This was the question she had been working on for 19 years, and she did not have a complete answer. She ran Chet's care under the strictest wild contact protocol available. Handlers in protective gear that covered all skin and muted human scent, limited direct eye contact, no vocalization during feedings, recorded natural sounds playing in the nursery room during waking hours. She brought in a wildlife consultant from the University of Washington named Dr. Sandra Price, who specialized in black bear reintroduction, to review the protocol and identify any gaps. Dr. Price reviewed it and found 1. You are feeding him, she said. You personally, every morning. I am the most experienced handler at this facility, Gloria said. That is not the problem, Doctor, Price said. The problem is that you named him and you are feeding him, and those two facts together mean that regardless of the gear and the scent masking and the audio protocol, this animal is going to know you. Not humans generically, you specifically. Gloria did not say anything. The protocol can account for a lot, Dr. Price said. It cannot account for 19 years of a person's particular way of moving through a room. Trudy Archer had an opinion that she kept largely to herself for the first 3 weeks, and then offered during a late evening feeding when it became clear that keeping it to herself was no longer possible. I think the protocol is right, she said. I also think you should let me take the morning feedings. You have been here 3 weeks, Gloria said. I know, Trudy said. That is why I should take the morning feedings. He does not know me yet. He knows you. Gloria stood at the nursery window and watched Chet, who was asleep in the warming nest with his face pushed into the corner of it. His breathing the deep, even rhythm of something that does not know how much rides on what happens next. I will think about it, Gloria said. She thought about it for 2 days and then gave Trudy the morning feedings and took the afternoon check instead. And she stood at the window for the first few mornings, watching Trudy in the full gear moving through the nursery, with the measured, careful movements of someone learning how to be less than a person in the presence of a small animal. And she thought that this was either the right decision or the beginning of a longer regret, and there was no way to know which from inside it. Chet grew the way black bear cubs grow, which is to say with a speed that seems disproportionate to any individual day, but, accumulated, produces a different animal every 6 weeks. By the time he was 4 months old, he weighed 11 pounds. By 6 months, 32. His coordination improved in stages. The stumbling front-heavy locomotion of early cubhood giving way to the rolling, shoulder-driven walk of an animal beginning to understand its own weight. He began foraging in the outdoor enclosure at 5 months, investigating the rotting logs and overturned sections of sod that Gloria placed for enrichment with the focused, purposeful attention of a bear discovering that the world contains grubs. The first time he found a grub and ate it, He made a sound that Gloria, watching from outside the enclosure fence, wrote in her notes as vocalizes low repetitive chuffing, duration approximately 4 seconds, apparent context. Positive food discovery. She reviewed the entry that evening and considered it clinically adequate and did not add anything to it. Dr. Price came back for a 6-month assessment and spent an afternoon watching Chet from the observation platform above the outdoor enclosure. She did not say much during the observation. Afterward, she sat across from Gloria in the center's small office and said, "He is doing well. The foraging behavior is good. The habituation indicators are within acceptable range." "But," Gloria said. "No but," Dr. Price said. "He is doing well." She paused. "He is also watching the door of the enclosure more than the logs. I wanted you to know that." "He watches a lot of things," Gloria said. "He watches the door," Dr. Price said, "specifically in the intervals between foraging. He has a particular way of positioning himself when someone is about to come through it." Gloria looked at her notes. "You are saying he is anticipating." "I am saying he is watching the door. What he is anticipating, I cannot tell you." Before we go further, this channel tells stories that do not simplify what actually happened. They are not all easy. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next for Chet, because what comes next takes 2 years and it does not go the way anyone planned, and the hardest moment is not the one you are expecting. The first separation attempt happened when Chet was 14 months old. The protocol for black bear rehabilitation at this stage called for a transition to a soft release site, a forested enclosure of at least 5 acres, remote from human activity, where the animal could begin to establish the independent movement and foraging patterns that would prepare it for eventual full release. The Washington DFW had a site in the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest, 40 miles from the center, that had been used successfully for 3 previous bears. Dr. Price had assessed Chet and cleared him for the transition. Gloria drove him to the site on a Thursday in June in a transport crate in the back of the center's truck. Trudy rode with her and did not say anything for most of the drive, which was the right choice. They transferred Chet to the site enclosure and closed the gate. He was in the crate for the transfer, and when the crate door opened, he moved into the enclosure without hesitation, smelled the air, the trees, the soil, and began walking. Gloria watched him through the enclosure fence until he moved into the tree cover and was gone. She drove back to Chelan County. At 4 a.m. the following morning, the site monitoring camera sent an alert to the DFW duty officer. The motion trigger had activated on the enclosure fence. By the time the duty officer reviewed the footage, it had activated 4 more times. Chet had located the weakest point in the perimeter fence, a lower section near a drainage runoff where the wire met the ground, and had tested it systematically for 3 hours. By sunrise, he had opened a gap large enough to exit, and by the time the DFW field officer arrived at 7 a.m., the enclosure was empty, and the GPS tracking collar showed Chet moving northeast at a pace that the officer described in his report as purposeful. Chet was recovered 16 miles from the soft release site at 2 p.m. the same day, in a drainage below a logging road, sitting in the way that he had been sitting when the trooper found him on Highway 214 months earlier. Present, unhurried, waiting. He was transported back to the center. Gloria sat with Dr. Price for a long time after Chet came back. "He found the weak point in 3 hours," Dr. Price said. "That is problem-solving behavior. That is not a bear that is cognitively compromised by the rehabilitation process." "No," Gloria said. "It is a bear that has decided he does not want to be at that site." "Yes, the question is whether that is a habitat preference. The site is not suitable for him. Or a social attachment response." Gloria looked at the intake record on her desk, the shoebox detail at the top, the weight at the bottom. 1 pound 14 ounces. Is there a version of this where it does not matter which one it is? She said. Dr. Price considered this. If it is habitat preference, we find a better site and try again, she said. If it is a social attachment response, we have a harder conversation. The harder conversation happened 3 days later. It involved Dr. Price, Gloria, a DFW wildlife manager named Tom Hargrove who had driven up from Wenatchee specifically for it, and a conference call participant from the Black Bear Research Institute who had reviewed the case notes. It lasted 2 hours. There were positions stated and defended and revised. At the end of it, the outcome was not what Gloria had planned for and not what she had feared most, which is the definition of a third path even when it does not feel like one. The decision was this: Chet would not attempt the soft release site again. He would remain at the center in the outdoor enclosure through one more winter, a full hibernation cycle in a managed den, under as close to natural conditions as the facility could provide, and would be assessed for a wild release in the spring at a site to be selected by Dr. Price in consultation with the DFW in a remote drainage that had not been used for any previous rehabilitation release and had no existing bear population that would complicate his territory establishment. The winter itself would be managed under strict non-contact protocol. No human presence at the den. Food caching ceased by late October to allow natural hyperphagia. The den entrance sealed from outside after Chet entered it, not opened until spring activity was detected by the monitoring camera. Tom Hargrove had a specific concern about this plan that he raised before the call ended. You are asking the director of this facility to maintain a non-contact protocol with an animal she has been in daily contact with for 14 months, for a period of approximately 5 months, he said, through a winter hibernation cycle. Yes, Dr. Price said. Is she able to do that? Gloria was in the room. This question was asked about her as though she were not, which she understood. It was a legitimate operational question, not a slight. But she answered it anyway. I will do it, she said. Tom looked at her. That is not the same thing. No, she agreed. But it is what I have. Moving into the prepared structure in the outdoor enclosure, with the slow pre-hibernation deliberateness of an animal whose metabolic systems were already changing, heart rate dropping, body temperature beginning its gradual decline toward the 40 to 50 degree range of torpor, the last of the autumn hyperphagia, complete. He weighed 187 pounds. He had eaten 6,000 calories the day before. Gloria sealed the den entrance on November 9th. She had checked the camera feed the night before. Chet already in the nest, already deep, and she had stood at the outdoor enclosure fence in the November dark for a while before she went inside. The center ran through December and January on the usual rhythm of winter intakes. A great horned owl with a head injury, 2 mule deer fawns from a highway strike, a juvenile coyote that had been living under a barn. Gloria treated them and logged them, and in the mornings she checked the den camera feed from her office and watched the infrared image of the nest, which showed nothing except the slow rise and fall of something breathing, and she did not go to the enclosure. She went once, in February, during a warm spell when the monitoring system flagged an anomalous temperature reading in the den. She went to the enclosure gate, not through it, and stood at the fence and listened. And the anomalous reading resolved on its own and she went back inside. She wrote this in her personal log and not in the center's official record. In March, the monitoring camera showed movement at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. Chet at the den entrance, head out, scenting the air, the specific deliberate emergence of a bear testing whether the world is ready yet. Gloria was in her office when the alert came through. She looked at the camera feed for a long time. Then she called Dr. Price and said, "He is awake." Price and the DFW selected was in the Methau Valley drainage, 63 miles from the center. in a section of the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest that had not been used for any previous bear rehabilitation and had a documented natural black bear density of approximately 1 bear per 7 square miles. The habitat was Douglas fir and ponderosa pine with significant early successional shrub cover. Huckleberry, serviceberry, the specific plant communities that support a black bear's spring diet after den emergence. Chet was transported in the spring of his 3rd year, on a morning in April in a crate in the back of the center's truck. Gloria drove. Trudy sat in the passenger seat and did not say anything for most of the drive, which was again the right choice. The release was a soft opening. The crate door opened at the forest edge, no handling, no ceremony. Chet stepped out onto the pine duff and stood for a moment with his nose up, moving through the air in long, deliberate pulls. Then he walked into the trees and did not look back. The GPS collar signal held. For the first 3 weeks, it showed him ranging within 2 miles of the release point, the movement pattern of an animal learning a new landscape from the ground up. By week 4, he had expanded to 6 miles. By week 8, 12. Gloria checked the collar signal every morning at 6 and every evening at 8. She told herself this was standard post-release monitoring protocol, which it was. The collar battery was rated for 18 months. It went dark in the 2nd October after the release, which was consistent with the manufacturer's specification, and which Gloria had known was coming, and which still felt, when the signal disappeared from the monitoring app on a Tuesday morning, like something more final than a battery failure. The DFW set camera traps in the metho drainage the following spring as part of a routine population survey. In June, a camera at a mineral lick 2 miles from Chet's original release point captured an image of a male black bear, large, moving along the creek bank in the even-shouldered walk of an animal that knows this ground. The camera's resolution was adequate to show the location of an old collar scar on the bear's neck, the compressed ring of fur that grows differently after a year and a half of wearing a GPS unit. The field officer who reviewed the images sent them to Gloria with a note that said, "Think this might be yours. Good condition. Look at the neck." Gloria looked at the neck. She forwarded the image to Dr. Price, who confirmed the collar scar location as consistent with Chet's unit. She forwarded it to Trudy, who had by then completed her degree and was working at a rehabilitation center in Oregon. Trudy wrote back, "He found the good huckleberry." Gloria could not verify this from a camera trap image at a mineral lick, but the shrub growth visible at the edge of the frame was consistent with early successional habitat. She printed the image and put it on the wall in her office next to the intake record from the first night, 1 pound 14 ounces, a shoebox, a state trooper who had said, "I did not know what else to do." In the 2nd summer after the collar went dark, a DFW wildlife manager running a road survey in the metho drainage logged a black bear sighting in his patrol notes. Adult male, large, moving in the timber above the county road, unhurried. He noted it the way you note things that are not unusual, because in this drainage, by then, bears were not unusual. He did not know this bear's history. There was no reason he would. The animal moved through the timber the way bears move when they have been somewhere long enough to stop being careful about it, with the specific ease of an animal that has decided this is its ground and intends to keep it. He watched it until it moved into the shadow of the trees and was gone. The road ran back down the valley. The timber held what it held. The drainage ran cold and quiet the way mountain drainages run in the early summer, when the snowmelt is still working its way down, and nothing in it announced itself, and nothing needed to.